Good evening, everyone. Liberty Dad here with a sort of special episode. Regular viewers of the show may have noticed that I've changed the show up just a little bit. And by that, what I mean is I've been mostly interviewing libertarian candidates on my Monday morning show at 7:30 a.m., Friendly Fire. Without giving you too many details, just know that I've got a bunch of potential ideas and things kind of moving. So I'm going slow to ensure that whatever gets started gets consistently delivered. And hopefully, we've got some really good stuff coming up for you in the future. But tonight, it is a sort of special show. For quite a while, I've wanted to bring a member of the trans community on and have a straightforward and friendly conversation about trans issues. My observation thus far is that people outside of the trans community seem to have one of two options. That is, accept what they are told and be an ally, or be considered a combatant in a seemingly never ending and raging culture war. At some point, people are going to have to sit down and work out unresolved issues. That can only happen when all sides are willing to hear the others. Hearing them means allowing a person to be honest with what's going on inside of their head with as little judgment as possible. When I invited Sarah to join me, I told her I was hoping to find someone to have an open discussion and who wouldn't be bothered if I made a misstep or asked the wrong questions, or maybe even came with some of my own certain views. Everything on my end is going to be in good faith, and I'm very open to correction and learning. Sarah agreed and didn't even feel it necessary to have what I intended to ask ahead of time. And I think that puts us both in the best position to have a great discussion. So, with that, let's go ahead and bring Sarah in. Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for agreeing to this. I'm not going to name any names. I don't like doing that. I had tried to reach out to some other folk a while back, and things just didn't quite work out. Nothing bad, just couldn't get things to happen, and that was okay. And I was kind of disappointed because there's a lot of things. I have a lot of questions, a lot of like, I don't really understand this,
Mhm.
help me out here. And so, the other day, it was last week, I was, we follow each other on Twitter, and you had made a comment, and then I made a comment, and then I was like, wait a minute. I was like, why don't I ask Sarah? And I did. And so here we are. So this is great. So
There it is. It's perfect. Yeah.
it's perfect. So I think that for the most part, we probably share a lot of mutuals on Twitter. I didn't really go look,
Yeah.
but for anybody that may be watching now or later, just go ahead and give a quick rundown of who you are, so in case anybody doesn't know you, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I'm a transsexual woman. I transitioned about 3 years ago. I am, um, I'm a pretty big part, I think, of the liberty movement as well. Like that's where we met when you were here in
Mhm.
Georgia. So I live
Yep.
in Atlanta. But I served in the army, which kind of conflicts with some of my current views. And,
Sure. Same.
but so it's really interesting because I create content. I do YouTube. I work with organizations trying to spread the message of liberty. I spoke at Freedom Fest this year, and so I'm in the space. I don't follow at all really with the woke comments, and actually I get a ton of hate from woke people and
Mhm.
people on the left. And it's interesting because I'm supposed to be part of their community, but they will
Mhm.
disown you, just for speaking out against what they believe. And I've done quite a bit of stuff. Like I had, I do a lot to expose queer theory. I do a lot promoting. I don't believe in trans women and women's sports. Um, you know, um, I had an article written about that I wrote about the sunk cost fallacy in regards
Mhm.
to transitioning and how it affects kids from a young age by even just telling, like, when that you change your pronouns and your name and then you move into it, you start with an initial cost, like an
Mhm.
investment. And so the deeper you get, the harder it is to turn around and change and get and step back from that investment.
Right.
That article was published in Human Events, which is a large publication, and it got a lot of attention. So I'm really proud of a lot of that stuff and proud of the work that I'm doing. And I'm speaking at some events coming up here pretty soon for No Left Turn Education, and that's kind of what I do is get out here and try to debunk some of this narrative about trans people as well, because there's a lot of us that are not, like those people that are creating the perceptions of us on the left.
Gotcha. So rather than kind of dive deep and ask you like personal questions, like, like when did you know and all that, maybe we'll just try to answer those if you think they're, they bring a value to the conversation as we go along. I think that
Yeah.
might, I try to keep my show slightly structured so that it makes sense, but so I think we can do that. But the first thing that I really wanted to ask is, and a lot of my questions and everything, and I'll have to lay a little bit of foundation, just kind of so where my mind is at. But I feel like a majority of the trans issues that we hear about and we talk about, they feel like they were worked out and decided for both trans and non-trans or cisgender people without really including too many of the cisgender folk. So I guess my first question is it okay to be skeptical about some of the things that we hear, or should we be skeptical? Where should we be coming from from the very beginning?
Yeah. Yeah. We should always be skeptical about what we're hearing going on.
Hmm.
And I think me and you would both probably agree that what adults do with their bodies is on them. But I think we would also where we a lot of the fight right now is on kids and
Hmm.
and kids transitioning, which I don't agree with. I don't believe in puberty blockers. I don't believe in a lot of this stuff because as we're starting to see, a lot of the studies that they used to quote are not accurate.
Okay.
So they used to say puberty blockers were completely safe, and then just this year, the new head of WPATH, or the president-elect of WPATH, Marcy Bowers, has been speaking about, stunted growth in puberty blockers and how puberty blockers can affect brain development, and
Hmm.
how they're not irreversible, and how, maybe we should take a step back and look at how they are actually affecting children.
Right.
And
You
so,
know.
and especially when you have the pharmaceutical industry
Mhm.
growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, this is about to be a $5 billion industry, and then you have the governor of Illinois has spent millions on advancing trans healthcare, when his, I guess, sister is trans, and so again, that's a government is pushing a lot of this as well, and
Mhm.
and making it, creating this narrative so that they all can get rich on the backs of big pharma.
Right. And I find it interesting. It seems like I've seen some people who will express a certain level of skepticism in big pharma, if you will, and but then all of a sudden they seem to take a 180 when it comes to like puberty blockers. All of a sudden they
Hmm.
seem to have a lot more faith in puberty blockers than they maybe did with, say, the COVID vaccine, or many other pharmaceuticals, or the relationship with government. But all of
Hmm.
a sudden, somehow, puberty blockers seems to be exempt from all the prior criticism, and
You
it's kind
know,
of weird to me.
I don't know. I don't know how true that is, because a lot of the same people who were going along with COVID vaccines and
Hmm.
doing all that are the same people that are pushing puberty blockers.
Okay,
I think a lot of the people that are against the puberty blockers are the people that were kind of against the COVID vaccines or
gotcha. Okay.
trusting government on the COVID vaccines. Um, and that's kind of, I actually wrote an article on my Substack a few months ago, and it was talking about how big pharma, to a lot of people, has gone from this villain
Hmm.
to kind of the savior. They've
Right.
gone from, it always used to be big pharma bad because they make so much money off the backs of sick people,
Right.
and now it's like they're in bed so much with government that yes, they're
Mhm.
pushing puberty blockers. They're pushing a lot of the queer theory and trans stuff onto children, which puts them in a lifelong, which gives the pharmaceutical companies a lifelong customer
Right.
as well. Government makes, I mean, and part of my article was about SSRIs. Government makes cannabis and psychedelics all
Mhm.
illegal, and yet and push SSRIs, and so many more people are on SSRIs than we've seen in this country forever, and yet a lot of those issues don't seem to be going down. In fact, they
Mhm.
seem to be more prevalent. Like, and especially again, you have COVID, you lock people in their houses, and you get more people on SSRIs.
Right.
I mean,
I think that's
there's a
why
lot of links
touching
there.
grass is so important, right? Get outside, touch some grass, dig a hole, whatever you gotta do, right? So for
Exactly.
you to keep maintain your mental health. So, speaking of children, uh, I kind of taken on this moniker of Liberty Dad, and so
Hmm.
I'm very curious about these proclamations of children understanding gender around 3 or 4. Now, I don't claim to be an expert. I just try to observe the world around me, and what I've observed out of my son is what I kind of observe, or at least I believe I've observed out of lots of other people's children. Friends of the family, and when I was going to church and places like that. And so, like, you often hear people say, well, my son thinks he's an astronaut or a dinosaur. And, clearly he's not. But to the best of my ability, it seems like he understands the distinction between male and female based purely on just some very simple physical attributes. For
Hmm.
instance, if I were to show him a photo of you, and he of course doesn't know who you are, and if I said, "Who is this?" I'm pretty sure that he would just say, "That's mommy. That's a mommy or whatever." Like that's it. He just long
Yeah.
hair,
Yeah.
some semblance of feminine characteristics in the face. I don't know exactly what he's using, but when we're reading books, when we ask him about other people, that's kind of the answer that he gives. But I don't think he
Yeah.
actually understands gender
Right.
personally. Is Where do you fall on that in terms of like children having any understanding whatsoever?
Um, so here's, yeah, I could kind of explain it a little bit too. I think it's what, around 3 or 4 is when you become self-aware of who
Hmm.
you are. And almost every trans person I know, transsexual that I know, that has legit gender dysphoria, has almost the same story, that they knew something was different about them around the age of 4. So
Hmm.
I'm the same way. I tried on a dress the first time when I was 4 years old, and I knew that there was something different because always wanted to be more like the girls.
Hmm.
However, the whole point is that every transsexual I know, I always liken it to that a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. So every person that has gender dysphoria knew very early on, but not every child, and actually very few children. And so not every child that thinks something's different about them early on has gender dysphoria or is trans. And actually, it's a very small percentage of us that actually
Hmm.
do. Um, and I used to, I mean, there's been studies about this. So Lisa Littman is probably the most renowned because
Hmm.
her study is what the uh the Dutch model was based on, which is giving kids puberty blockers until the age of 16. And the reason why that study is important, and I used to criticize the study because it basically took any kid that was gender nonconforming and said 80% of them will desist or not have gender dysphoria or not feel that they want to transition by the age of 16.
Hmm.
And so that's why they took the puberty blockers. Said, well, if you take puberty blockers, it's completely reversible. You
Hmm.
can opt out, and if you get to 16 and you're still on that point, there's a 1.3% chance that you'll actually detransition, because those were what the numbers used to be before it became like this big social craze.
Right.
Now I think the study is valuable because they're telling so many kids that if you fit into these stereotypes, like you were talking about earlier, all these different stereotypes, and you think that you might be trans or you're gender nonconforming. If you're gender nonconforming, you're trans. And that's what they're telling every child these days. And so now that study is completely irrelevant because you think only 20% of those kids that are gender nonconforming are actually trans. And that's only it's actually about 0.1% of the population.
Gotcha.
And we're seeing that it grow tremendously among the population and tremendously among young females. So females to males is a huge spike.
Right.
And there's a lot of factors in that as well. My friend Christina Buttons, I had her on my show. She spoke about it, and she's talked about her autism. She's on the spectrum. So and so her Asperger's is it actually presents itself very similar to gender dysphoria. So young females that have Asperger's actually kind of present, or their feelings are very much the same as somebody who a female that might say they have gender dysphoria. So we could be getting misdiagnoses because most of the Asperger's criteria was written for males. So it presents itself different in males and females.
Okay. So if what is the maybe not the best approach, but what would be a good approach if you got a parent and their child seems to be entertaining things that are what might seem out of the ordinary, and rather than, because it feels like a lot of parents will just kind of leap and like, oh, it's like my child must be trans now, and I'm like, and it feels very similar to you mentioned Asperger's. I remember years ago, there was it wasn't as big, but it was a small craze where every time a parent had like a child that had some awkward traits, like to stack up their blocks in a very specific way, you seem to have these awkward behaviors. They're like, man, maybe my child's got like Asperger's or something. They're high functioning, and it was like, okay, look, like every awkward child isn't Asperger's. That just seems absurd. So I feel like it's the same situation here. But how best might a parent approach that so that they offer the proper care without overdoing it?
Yeah, I think, and this is what used to be diagnostic criteria before we got into the Dutch model. So it's really interesting because the U.S. has been the last to adopt the Dutch model of puberty blockers until 16, and now we're the last to get rid of it. Like every other country that's used it has got rid of it because of the issues with puberty blockers. Now, what used to be what they would do is it's called watchful waiting, is let your kids be kids. Let them explore who they are. Let them do, if they're exploring their gender, they're exploring their gender, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're trans. Maybe there's a whole number of things that they could be that's not trans. And so if, you can indulge to a point, you can tell your child, no, you're a boy, if they're a boy, and that's fine. Reinforce that, but also be open to the fact that they might be trans. But medical transition, it's not something that should be done by, adolescents. You shouldn't have anybody that's, even under the age of 18 getting plastic surgeries. And I would say that for anybody, any type of plastic surgery,
I agree.
whether it's a young female that wants to get, breast implants, I don't think that's right either. I think 18 for surgeries. Now, I'm willing to have a conversation about how much gatekeeping, and if we are going to do it, it would be a lot of gatekeeping, but watchful waiting, and then possibly skipping puberty blockers, but possibly allowing, hormone replacement therapy at the age of 16.
Okay.
I can have it. I'm open to a conversation about that, but I'm not sold either way into where that would be. So I don't really take a big stance on that, because I do feel for a lot of the male to females who, if they go through full puberty, there's no possibility. You don't get, unless you're lucky. Like, I didn't transition until later in life. You don't get, it doesn't happen very often where you get like me or Blair White or any, a lot of the other people who can typically pass a little bit better. You
Right.
get a lot of people that look like the it's ma'am lady, and then society wants to deem them, be hateful and stuff to them, even though they were in the wrong in that situation. But I'm just saying, just the way that that person looked, society's
Right.
not at the point where people can just be walking around like that and feel great about themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's funny, like my son, he is, like I said, he's 3.5, and he seems, I don't know that it's 100%, but he seems occasionally drawn to the color pink.
Yeah,
Just because, like, we'll take him to the gym and he'll, like, they bring out the little cars and he grabs the pink one. We went to the store, we were getting him some new shoes, and he decided he want these. They were kind of more of a rainbow color, but there was a little bit more pronounced pink on them, and he liked them. He's like, "Oh, I want the pink shoes," and so we call them the rainbow shoes. And so we're like, "Okay, whatever you." And I feel like this kind of like this watchful waiting, because I'm just like,
yeah,
he's 3.5, he has no idea, and I'm like, he's just having fun, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't
exactly.
really make a big fuss out of it. Actually, I don't make a fuss out of it at all. I'm just like, okay, you want the pink shoes, whatever, because he wants a
Yeah,
lot of things. Like, in some things he can't have, right? Like some things he really can't have. Then other things, it's like, okay, maybe with some assistance. Like, yeah, you want to come out and maybe work with some tools, which he loves. He
yeah,
loves coming out. He's got his own workbench. He's got his own tools, so he'll come out and he'll play with tools, while I'm working on a project. And so he's kind of just, I think he's just kind of exploring, and that's kind of what we taught him to do, is just go explore, because I'm like, I don't really care.
yeah. There's no reason to really care at that point, right? Because I mean, and this is the whole thing about like pink or anything like that, like what they like. Yeah, remember pink used to be a color of royalty. I mean, it
Right.
used to be mostly worn by males. Like
Right.
it used to be like backwards. So how it became is just these societal social norms that really
Right.
means nothing. And like you said, like if you like to play with tools and stuff like that, I just don't like these stereotypes that they're using, because heck, I am still would consider myself more of a tomboy than most,
Hmm.
than a lot, because I'll go to the gym, I wear hats, I wear backwards hats, I wear,
Hmm.
and but then I get feminine sometimes, and so there's really no one way to be a person. You just do what you do. But I had gender dysphoria, and
Hmm.
so the best way and I think a friend of mine said the best way that they would ask people, like, are you really trans? Like, if you were stranded on a desert island naked, would you still want to transition? I think
Hmm.
that's a key as well.
Interesting.
Like, would you still have those same insecurities about your body at that point,
Right.
without all the stereotypes? And for me, it
Right.
was yes, and
And
it was a very
without all the
big no.
judgment.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's an interesting question. I don't know that I should go around and ask that too often, but
No.
my people might be like, dude, why are you asking me how I want to be on an island naked or not? Like, but no, it's a very interesting question, um, just because it does kind of remove the potential social factors that maybe play. Because I think that social factors play a huge role in things, and
Hmm.
I'll get into that a little bit later, in some areas that I wanted to discuss. I do want to talk about like social transitioning. I believe the term is detransitioning, and then the gender affirming care. So I think we've kind of come to a conclusion that for young children, just let them be. If he wants to traipse around the house wearing daddy's shoes or mommy's shoes, don't make a big fuss of it. If he wants to, put on some lipstick, maybe not at 3, I don't know, but let him play with it. Maybe he'll probably just want to draw on the wall,
Probably.
whatever. But don't make a big fuss of it, right? But what
Right.
about when we get to more like adolescence, right? And I want to single out adolescence, because I think we've kind of come to terms with children, toddlers,
Hmm.
and then I think most people would probably be a little bit more open to certain conversations when you're talking like 15, 16, 17-year-old, because you're getting closer to that age of 18 where
Yeah.
you can make all of your decisions. And you're pretty immature at 16 as well as 18 as well. So it's not like you've had this
Mhm.
leap in maturity in
Yeah.
most cases.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit more flexibility there. But I think when you're around like 10, 11, 12, 13, I've heard a lot of people suggest that there's a social contagion ab- about being trans, because people haven't come to terms with, like, maybe they're just a tomboy,
Yep.
or maybe it's just a phase. Like, this is how you feel now, but it's not necessarily how you're going to feel in 2 years, whatever the case
Yeah.
may be. Is that
Yeah.
is that something you think the data supports?
Yeah, I think that there is this social contagion aspect of it. Especially again, like what I said before, is to why we're seeing such a spike in young females.
Hmm.
Think about this. How many right around the age of puberty, young females and males, I mean, typically they don't feel good about who they are and or
Hmm.
their body. They're going through these changes, and it's confusing for them, and they don't and it's one of the most insecure times that a person can have.
Hmm.
And so if you have people telling you that, well, if you don't like your body, then you might be trans or you might be non-binary
Hmm.
or something like this. And see, the thing about non-binary is a lot of it just a lot of the non-binary and a lot of the that stuff, it kind of reminds me a lot of like when I was growing up and the goth kids were a huge thing, you know.
Mm.
The only
Okay.
difference is now they're medically transitioning, you know, and so or they're, you know, getting these surgeries and all this other
Hmm.
stuff. And it is, I mean, I hear from people all the time who have kids in school who are like, it went from like one person maybe in a school, you know, maybe had gender dysphoria to now, you know, half of a class is calling themselves trans. I had a friend tell me that their kids, it's like you have the Rainbow Brigade, and then you have like the BLM Brigade, and you have like all these woke brigades that are all these like social and cultural discussions that we're having all the time as adults online, and they're just kind of living through like almost vicariously through us. It's like this activist it's like this activism has hit our schools. Instead of kids being kids, kids are fighting each other just as much as adults are fighting each other online.
Hmm.
It's
But didn't we do
and
that
so
anyway? Didn't we do that when we were kids? We found a group that we were supposed to be a part of,
it
right?
wasn't
And then
political though. I
mm,
don't see it, and they're doing, and that's the other thing is they also have activism, like we're the goth kids and the emo kids, and that's what I call the goth emo scene to trans kid pipeline. Like that's where it seems to have gone through the years. It's gone from like all that. The only difference is there's this activism.
right,
Like, what are children doing out protesting on the steps of, you know, government? I mean,
right,
it, maybe that's fine, but I think kids should be kids, even if it's for a
right.
cause that we might like, you know, like protesting, you know, some war or something like that. But I still think that kids should be kids and not have to worry about, you know, what's going on. I think that's part of my generation at least has kind of, we're all political. And when I
Hmm.
was growing up, it wasn't super political until maybe I got to high school. Like I didn't even really
Right,
care about politics until I got to high school, and then it was important. But then again, I was
right.
also in high school right at 9/11, so it kind of pulled
Mm.
you into that spot.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
being more kind of like a divide, if you will, between maybe just being more social and more conservative and more liberal per se,
mhm,
because you wanted to talk about events of the day, but you weren't necessarily getting into the politics, the government aspect of it, what they should do, what the schools should implement. It was just
yeah,
more like you might argue about something you heard on the news, that
yeah,
was kind of being talked about, and you would take a more conservative or liberal approach. That's what I
yeah.
remember.
And you see a lot of these kids that are just looking for a place to belong. And so that's really where it kind of comes in. And then you also see it, and this is what Abigail Schreier wrote about in her book, Irreversible Damage, especially with the young girls, is this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, which I don't like the term because it's not really gender dysphoria. It is this, but it describes what this social contagion is. And what Abigail kind of talked about was it always comes out that like if one person in the friend group comes out, like
Hmm.
almost everybody else in the friend group is starting to come out.
Right.
And you almost, and I've heard stories of kids saying they're pansexual, but only because if you're not some part of the LGBT, you know, Q movement, I'm just going to call it the NQ plus movement, then then you're deemed as hateful or a
Hmm.
bigot or anything like that. If you're basically a straight cis person, and I cis in quotes, but a straight cis person, then you're deemed a bigot in these schools, and that's kind of the way that everybody else around you sees. And it also comes into play when you got some of these teachers out there that are kind of even pushing this stuff, you know,
Mhm.
and all these problematic teachers and that you see on TikTok. And they're pushing this stuff to the kids, and
Right.
so when the kids see the teachers doing this, then they're kind of like, "Oh, this is cool," and then it's like, "Oh, now I have a special relationship with this teacher," which causes all sorts of issues as well.
Right. I think a lot of parents today, I think one of the so libs of TikTok, the Twitter account, because I'm not on TikTok. I don't I
Yeah.
cannot I cannot give any more time to social media. I give enough time to it and I need to stop. As much I'm actually trying to dial it back a little bit so that it's more constructive. But I'll watch libs of TikTok and sometimes I wonder, I'm like, are these just like actors? Like, is there that many teachers? But even if there's only half, right? Like if let's just say that half of the ones that I've seen from libs of TikTok are real, and the other half are just people looking for attention. That's still a lot. And it's
It's a lot.
weird. And I remember, like, I've told people this before. I said, when I was in school, you really didn't know much about your teacher's family life. About the best you could surmise is if they were a Mrs., then you're like, okay, they're married, just because the
Yeah.
title is given to a married woman. And if they're Miss, then you could say, yep, they're not married. But if they were a Mister, then you had no clue. Like, it could be a married
Mhm.
man, it might not be a married man. So, but beyond that, like I don't remember. There was a story here in Florida where I think I even commented on it. But it was in the news. There was like a little clip of this guy, and he was like, yeah, I think he was a gay teacher. It was when we had the "Don't Say Gay" bill,
Yep.
and he was saying, you know, he was saying that sometimes he comes into class, and I don't remember what grade he was in, but sometimes he comes into class and they're like, "Oh, what'd you do, over the weekend, Mister, so and so," and he would be, he might say, "Oh, my husband and I went out paddleboarding," and he was like, it was like, I'm afraid to say that now, yada yada yada. But I don't even remember that much, right? Like when I was growing up, like
Yeah.
I don't think my teachers even said that they went out, and had a fun trip, just a very simple, like, oh, yep, I went to the putt-putt golf course with my spouse. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even remember those kind of things. They were pretty tight-lipped about their own
Yeah.
personal lives for the most part.
Yeah,
Not
you're right.
always,
I
but
mean, even when I was growing I mean, they were pretty tight-lipped, but they would tell some story I mean, I remember some
Mhm.
stories, like, me and
I
my
remember a
husband went
few,
here,
but
we went there, but here and that's the thing, is even the parental choice or the "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida, it didn't prevent them from doing that. It
I didn't
literally
think
just
so. Others thought it
prevent
was ambiguous.
Yeah, there was a lot of ambiguity to the law, and I learned a little bit about why, because I had some criticisms over how that law was, too, but I consulted on the bill that's they pre-filed in Louisiana, so we're going to be pushing that legislation through pretty
Mhm.
soon. But it's a much shorter bill. And when I said I didn't when I told the congresswoman that I didn't want like the ambiguity that the Florida bill had, um, she actually informed me that well the reason why the bill was so you know it had some open-ended areas or open to
Mhm.
interpretation areas is because those types of things are then left up to the local school boards, which
Mm.
again, decentralization is a good thing. And so like
Right.
the Louisiana bill is literally 2 paragraphs, and then
Mm.
we had some amendments that I had asked to be put in there. But at the end of the day, I was like, I told her actually like this too, is I was like, you know, honestly, I'd rather you guys just do a fund students instead of institutions bill, and then if parents want to send their kids to these woke schools, they can, and if parents
Right.
want to send their kids to the religious schools, they can too. It's no
Right.
issues. But if you're going to file this bill, I would love to help on
Right.
it.
My yeah, my I remember reviewing two bills related to trans students. One of them was here in Florida, I believe, and it was regarding um athletes. And like at the very beginning of what I had to say about it, I was like, I didn't like I usually don't like bills. Like it's like I've reviewed like, I don't know, as a layperson, not a lawyer, but as a layperson, I've reviewed probably somewhere around 25 bills, and I think
Hmm.
all of two have I actually liked, and those were kind of like, one was uh, uh, they were both to give more freedom to the people, in my opinion,
Hmm.
at the expense of less freedom for the government, if you will. I know government doesn't really have freedom, but for lack of better
Yeah.
phrasing.
Yeah.
So I felt like it put more limitations on government and basically freed up people. So one was like the Breonna Taylor bill, which would ban no knock raids. So I was like, yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, and it was like a paragraph.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to remember what the other bill was. I just don't remember, but it was something along the same lines, like, banning no knock raids or something like that. But otherwise, I generally dislike bills because they tend to be vague, and I'm like, and I've watched where a bill that has went through maybe at a local level has ended up harming the very people that it was supposed to protect. And
Well,
so I
yeah.
usually oppose bills, if nothing else, for on that ground. So the bill that I objected to here in Florida started out by saying something like, because young girls need to be able to show their athletic skills for their future careers and all this other stuff. We feel like it's the government's role to make sure that they have that opportunity. And I was like, whoa, 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 stop right there. Like, we haven't even gotten into the trans part of the bill. We're
Hmm.
talking about whether it's your responsibility to provide girls, or anybody for that matter, but it was talking about girls specifically, but whether it's your job to provide students with an opportunity to showcase their athletic abilities. And I was like, that's not really your job. At a minimum, if we're going to keep schools under the government purview, education, hell, you can't even do that. You're failing reading, writing, math, like, and we want to give you more. Like, that just seems crazy. So yeah, I usually oppose these kind of bills just on those reasons alone. Um, and then I don't like the ambiguity, because I'm like, I don't know what this means. I don't know where this will go. Like, so I understood some of the "don't say gay" complaints. I didn't quite fully agree with how it was presented. I felt it was presented very much scare tactic. So, but it is what it is,
Yeah,
I
it
guess.
could have been. And that's the thing is Florida's going to leading the way with that with Ron DeSantis down there too. Like I said, I'm working with an organization called No Left Turn Education right now. I'm
Hmm.
speaking at two of their events here coming up. They're also
Nice.
the ones that kind of got the that exposed like all the CRT being taught in
Mm.
schools in Virginia. And actually, one
Hmm.
of the events that I'm speaking at is up in Virginia as well, which that got a lot of attention this last week because Eventbrite canceled the event. So
Oh yeah, I
um,
saw that. Yep.
yeah, and so that I mean, but that's actually generally a positive thing because it just gives more promotion to the event itself. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder,
but you
like,
are
what's
right
the
though.
purpose?
Yeah, you are right though. So what happens generally if government puts out a bill and they name it something
Hmm.
like the Inflation Reduction Act, maybe, it's probably going to do the opposite.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Just as a rule of thumb, like, I generally oppose bills so, uh, bring me any bill you want to review. I'll probably review it harshly. But, I want to ask you. So I think now we're going to get into some of the areas where you see society having some of the bigger disagreements. Right now, there is the disagreement on social transitioning. I don't have it. I I don't have a huge issue with a child, socially transitioning, maybe experimenting a little. Though I
Hmm.
do think that it is up to the parent to maybe work with the child and say, look, you're not even ready for this,
Hmm.
because there's always there are no solution. There's only trade-offs, right? So you might have a son or a daughter who wants to socially transition and then start wearing the opposite gender's clothing or something like that. But there will be some level of cost to that. And I think, like
Hmm.
you said early on, you'd mentioned, this sunk cost issue, where you get in there and it's hard to remove yourself, because then there's no embarrassment to say, no, I'm not trans. Well, maybe limited, maybe not, no, but there's very limited, I would assume.
Yeah,
Right? Somebody says, hey, are you trans? No, not really. I'm just, what you see is what
just
you
me.
get here. Right? um but if you start down that path, then you have to suffer saying I was wrong,
Yeah.
right? And I think right now the current environment doesn't really lend itself to somebody saying, you know what, I was experimenting, and after a little experimentation, I decided that that wasn't really me, right? And
Yeah.
and we all know stories. Maybe we all know, I don't know, but I think we all know stories of women who went to college and they were like, yeah, I experimented with another woman. Yeah, it wasn't for me, right? Like they experimented, they tried it out and didn't work, and they went back to just being with a man, and no big deal. Like nobody cares. Nobody's like, oh, I
Mhm.
can't believe it, you terrible. So there was no sunk cost there to continue.
Yeah.
So
Now, if a
so I
man
agree.
did that, now if a man
Yes,
did that,
yes, yeah. Yeah, I think it would be hard.
it's
It's
a
like
little bit different though. Yeah,
right,
it would be he would be labeled bisexual for the rest of his life, but or
right,
gay. You know?
right.
But that's just the way it is. But yeah, there it is really interesting now because when you think about it, I don't have an I think we still need to be cautious, and that's what the reason why I dove so deep into the sunk cost fallacy is because I think, you know, it's labeled as a social transition should be 100% fine. Is that, you know, a social transition should be 100% fine, you know, that nobody you know, because there's no medical intervention, which I agree with. I think
Hmm.
that we social transition is okay. I think we
Hmm.
should push against it when it's like prior to like the age 7 or 8. But some kids are gonna do it. They're just gonna
Right.
want to, you know, be who they are, and there shouldn't be any social pressure put on them. See, what happens typically, it seems like, is child comes out as trans, and if their parents are all accepting of it, it's like they go in on it. And
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
a documentary called Transhood on HBO, and there was a 4 year old on there, and they followed this 4 year old, and the 4 year old ended up being like, I'm not trans. That mom went from being 100% my kid is trans, like so accepting, like almost pushing this child to being like trans people don't exist because my child is not trans. So it went
Right.
like the exact opposite direction.
Right.
But what happens even when you're talking about like somebody that's older, think about what happens when you come out. I mean, we still live in a society that, you know, some parents are still not supportive. Some parents will disown their kids, and all this. But even if the parents are accepting, they, you know, and a child comes out, parents are accepting, but you're still going to go through this. You may lose friends, you may lose
Mhm.
family members, you may, you know, you've told everybody you're trans, and to say that you were wrong and made a mistake
Mhm.
it is in this current culture. It's one of the things that almost like people don't seem to be able to say that anymore. You know, we can't even
Right.
admit that we made an honest mistake, and so
Right.
all of that is a cost. Um,
Right.
and then because I mean, if your parents are accepting, and then you know maybe you deal with their parents are not so accepting, so you're not even talking to your grandparents anymore. That is a
Right.
cost. So you can imagine like going to your parents, be like, "Hey, I think I made a mistake," you know, and they're like I don't even talk to my parents anymore, like your grandparents anymore, because you made this mistake, and I
Right.
believed you, and so how does a child come back from that? It's
Right.
very difficult. I think there has to be a lot of intervention, a lot of, you know, there's got to be a lot of therapy, but not necessarily the therapy that we're seeing nowadays with this
Mhm.
affirmation only care. There needs to be some real hard looks at who the person is and if this is right for them, even at the level of social transition.
Mhm.
But again, I have no issues with social transitions just for the fact that there really is, you know, no medical intervention. Nothing
Right.
there is permanent. But once you start medical intervention, then that cost goes up even higher. And
Right.
so what like the detransitioners do now is so amazing, and they are such amazing people because they actually made took, you know, that cost is so high for them. They were actually living and taking hormones or
Mhm.
had medical procedures, and to say that, you know, they made a mistake is that's incredibly brave.
Right.
And then they get the hate that they get from, you know, the woke left and uh, for basically making the rest of the community look bad.
Right.
And so I give everything for the detransitioners that come out, because I think their story tells, should be a warning that maybe what you think you're doing right now is not what you're going to feel in the future.
Right.
And it's interesting because I saw this coming back in, 3 years ago. I was kicked out of Reddit groups for saying that transgenders are real, and when the detransition rate skyrockets, it's going to hurt actual trans people, and that's what it's doing. You're seeing a lot of even social conservatives starting to push like even adults shouldn't transition. So,
Right.
and it hurts trans people, but I love the detransitioners for coming out and telling their stories, because it should give that other side of the argument that we can start using to push back against a lot of the social contagion aspect that we're seeing.
Gotcha. So I want to talk about language. This is one
Mhm.
that's like near and dear to me, because I've observed it and it just seems so bizarre. So let's start with pronouns. Okay. So I don't. I think when I first came to this issue, I was like, "Nah, I ain't using somebody's pronouns. That's just crazy talk." And part of it was just I don't like. I have enough trouble remembering somebody's name, and it's
Mhm.
weird to me when people say like, "Oh, just remembering somebody's pronouns is super easy." And I'm like, "What do you mean easy? I literally have trouble remembering some. Like you will tell me if I had first met you and you said, 'Hi, I'm Sarah.'" I'm like, "Oh, great, nice to meet you, Sarah." And then like 5 minutes, I'll be like, "What's your name again?" Like, I just like I forget people's names like very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So the idea that I'm just gonna somehow magically remember your pronoun when with a name, I have nothing necessarily to go by. Like there's no like it's not like you look like a Sarah or a
Yeah.
John or a Jennifer
Yep.
or any, there's but people do look. I have a visual reference for gender,
Mhm.
and so which is associated with pronouns. So if I look at you, I'm going to more instinctively, just you specifically, I will instinctively think she, right?
Yeah.
Because you have that appearance. There are some people that have not made that a transition, or
Mhm.
unfortunately, their looks don't lend to making it very, very obvious, unfortunately,
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And so I'm like, no, it's not always that simple. But the biggest problem I have is it feels like it's really demanding how somebody else speaks about you when they're not talking to you. And
Yeah.
I find the demand a bit annoying because it's like like years ago I made this joke. I was like, "Oh, if they got personal pronouns, well, I got personal adjectives, and I want you to, refer to me as awesome and great and wonderful. Like it shouldn't be too hard, no big deal, right? Like just refer to me that way because that's, and so my general rule of thumb is if someone demands it, like if they just act as if like you will say this or I won't talk to you, I hate you, or I'm gonna, scold you. I'm gonna like I don't really respond well to ultimatums. So I'm just gonna be like, oh, that's how it's gonna be. I see. Well,
Yeah.
now I'm just gonna be a jerk on purpose, probably. But if you're just like, hey DL, do your best, but try to hit me up with the she and the her or whatnot. As long as it doesn't get crazy. I don't want to do this like 50 different pronoun type things. Like let's try to keep it
Yeah.
simple. I'm
Yeah.
I'm a simple guy. Like try to keep it simple with me. But where is the line drawn? Where do you feel it's drawn, and where should it be drawn on the issue of pronouns?
It is interesting. I have the same issues, especially with when it comes to neo pronouns and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I don't really get too much into that. Now, I try as
Are the neo
much as
pronouns the
possible.
z and zer and all that?
Yeah, like all that.
Okay.
Even they them is considered a neo pronoun.
Okay.
Um, but if it's somebody that I know and somebody that I like, and we actually have some people here in Atlanta in our liberty movement here that use they them, and I will try my best. It's very difficult to do, and so I completely understand it, because it's not natural. It's not
Right.
natural to speak like that, and then to remember everybody's pronouns. Yeah, it's crazy, and even for me. So I, uh, I I don't believe in compelling speech.
Mhm.
If if you misgender me on accident, it's no issue. I get it. There's things about me. It's just what comes to the top of your head. People apologize all the time. I'm like, don't worry about it. And if I get misgendered, it means I'm not trying hard enough to pass.
Mhm.
And I understand. Like sometimes you hear my voice and you may not. It will click in your head. There's subconsciously that this person's male, and that's the way that it just sounds to me, and so it might just come out, and it just
Mhm.
happens. It's
Right.
no issue. Now there is a difference, I think, with when you're doing it to be malicious and on
Mhm.
purpose. For me, I'm not going to make you change how you behave and how you speak. I'm just going to disassociate. That's
Mhm.
the great thing about free speech is I can
Right.
just
Yeah.
disassociate. I have no issues. If you're going to be a jerk to me, then I really don't care to be around you anyways. That's the type of
Sure.
person that
Sure.
I am. Now, I've had some great people in the past kind of tell me this, and it makes complete and total sense. Now, if you are a person that does not believe in free speech, if you are a communist, and you don't believe in free speech, you don't believe in that stuff, then why am I going to respect your pronouns because I know that that gets to you?
Right.
You know. And so I know people that do that, and when I
Right.
hear people that do that, I'm kind of like it's almost like a debate tactic that they
Mhm.
can use to get under these people's skins to make them make a mistake.
Right.
But if you're like I said, I will just disassociate from people that don't respect me because I do think that is a sign of respect. But I'm
Mhm.
not into compelling speech at all like that. I mean, if
Right.
you can say what you want, I don't really care what you think about me.
Right.
So go ahead, And I think
Right.
it's too easy to disassociate.
Yeah, I find it very similar to, I go by DL. My legal
Mhm.
name is Daniel. Growing up, people would ask me like, "Do you want to be called Daniel, Danny, Dan, D, whatever." I didn't go by DL until a little bit later in life, till it was maybe mid-30s, something like that. But usually people try to refer to you how you want to be. But I
Mhm.
have found kind of, if you're a jerk about it, people will be like, "Oh, you want to be called Fred, huh? Well, Freddie." It's like,
Yeah.
because what they're doing is they're kind of like throwing it back at you and saying, "Look, if this is how you're going to behave, then this is how I will treat you." And
Mhm.
I, I do it. I don't think it's maybe the best form of human interaction, but at the same time, I'm like, I feel like there kind of needs to be a cost for being
Yeah.
unpleasant, and one of the
Yeah.
costs is, now I think I do believe there needs to be some flexibility, and some people have been like people try to say, "Oh, it's so easy to remember people's pronouns," and I'm like, let me tell you something. First of all, going back to the whole name thing, so that's one. I'm American. My wife is from Indonesia. What people don't realize, and I don't know how many languages are like this, but her language uses the same word for he and she. Okay. So she grew up, I think the word is like dia, dia, or something like that. And so the
Mm.
rest of the sentence kind of clues you in, or something. I'm not quite sure exactly because I'm
Yeah.
still kind of learning. But so what happens is when she's speaking English, she will misgender people all the time. Like, and this is now, we're not talking about trans people. We're talking about, like, she might
Just
be talking
everybody.
about everybody. It could be her own son, and she'll be like, "Yeah, my son's Zach." And usually she catches herself and corrects, but sometimes she misses it because she's busy with a thought or whatnot, right? And so I'm like, no, it's actually not that easy necessarily for people that maybe come from a language where there isn't they use the same word in this particular case, or maybe this English is a second language and they're still getting used to placing the right word in one language with the right word in another language. So I'm like, no, this is
Yep.
really not that easy, in my opinion, on top of the name issue.
Uh, I'm learning
So
Spanish again, and it's still difficult.
yeah. But the other problem that I have with pronouns is that there seems to be this idea that no that we can use language very, very specifically. But at the same time, the same people who would demand that will be very quick to use terms like transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, and all these other ones. And I once upon a time objected to the idea of homophobia because I was like, look, phobias are very interesting. When somebody says they have like arachnophobia or aquaphobia or some, any other phobia, they know that they have an irrational fear, and they would rather not. And some of them will even try to not let that fear overpower them, and they can't. You lock somebody who's got claustrophobia in a closet, and they're going to spaz out until they pass out, or possibly, right? And so it's just, I find it very interesting that we have this flexibility to use a word like transphobia, because let's be honest, most people probably are more, in my assumption, unclear, confused, like doesn't make sense to them, as opposed to an actual fear,
Mhm.
right? Like I don't think I've ever met anybody that's like, oh my God, if a trans person comes around, I'm just gonna freak out. Right? Like, no,
Yeah.
not. I mean, there might be some, but probably very few.
I don't know the history really even behind that, because like homophobia and stuff like that, that would, it's an old term, right?
Mhm.
Um, it maybe it derives from when people were just like afraid that like gay people were always going to like come onto them or something. I have no
Right.
idea where that term even comes from,
Right.
honestly, and that's interesting because I've never really, I know that everybody's like, I'm not afraid of them. I just don't like them. It's like,
And I think
well,
when
what's the better
homophobia,
term?
yeah, I think when homophobia did come out, I think there was a little bit more legitimacy to it, because well, I don't know when it came out exactly as far as a
What?
term in popular use, but
Hmm.
when I was a young man, I knew a lot of young guys that'd be like, "Oh, gay guy, and
Yeah.
they would act kind of stupid. These were like your 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old guys who kind of acted as if they were going to get the gay cooties or something like that. And then most of us, probably almost all of us, grew up and realized that was dumb, and that no such thing was going to happen,
Yeah.
right? But it seems like, but it just seems weird to me that we're in this situation where, in one hand, we use a word, or we're insisted that we need to use these words because these are, there's a certain precision that's
Hmm.
necessary. But then over here, we're like, well, we can use these words, and there's no attention given to the imprecise nature, and
Well,
that kind of
what's
bothers me.
so it's kind of the same thing, but you realize, I mean, a lot, you start to see too that in terms of trans people,
Hmm.
the term turf or
Hmm.
trans exclusive radical feminist has as taken over for transphobia. They won't necessarily say you're transphobic; they'll just call you a turf, and go from there. And
Even men.
again, I was gonna say even that is imprecise, but when you know again where that word derives from,
Hmm.
because it derives from, so queer theory has been kind of this, it derived from feminism in the early 90s,
Hmm.
in gender studies courses. And so when you get into the queer theory aspect of it, um, third wave feminists have been fighting fourth wave feminists on this same issue for a very long time, because fourth wave feminists want to include trans people into their form of feminism because they're more queer theorists, whereas third wave feminists are more practical, are still not at that point, so they are, more maybe even the man hating feminists, but they don't want males in their space. They are more based on
Hmm.
sex. So that's the difference between
Gotcha.
third and fourth wave. And so they've been fighting for a long time. So third wave feminists are technically trans exclusive radical feminists. And when it was interesting because that was our Freedom Fest panel, and Olivia Rondo said, "I don't even know why I'm on this panel because I'm not really a feminist." And I just responded, "I don't know why I'm on this panel because I'm not really a woman, but."
So let me ask you, do you, I think I saw, and I'm never going to remember how he phrased it, but Buck Angel.
Yes.
And just for the record, everybody, if you're listening and you don't know who Buck Angel is, do not Google it. Go to Twitter and look it up. You're better off. Promise you.
I
Bad
love Buck.
idea.
Okay. Buck
Good,
is a
probably
friend
a
of
good
mine too.
person.
So
I have no problems, but also at least was a former porn star or current?
no, he is a former porn star. He's one of the first female to male people to transition, and yeah,
Right.
he actually still sells like sex
Okay.
toys, and he works in the cannabis industry. So
Gotcha. So I'm just saying, like, I'm not telling you not,
don't
well,
Google it.
yeah, I don't want to say not to, but just I've warned you, be careful. So you're better off going to like Twitter and doing a search there. And so then you're not going to get all the very explicit results that you will find. Cause that's what happened to me. I was like, who's this Buck Angel guy? And I was like, I was like, whoa, I was like, was not expecting that. But
One of
I
the nicest
believe,
people you'll ever meet, though.
really,
Nicest people.
I
I love
believe,
Buck.
I can't remember how he describes himself, but it's something like, I am a man. No, I'm a man in a woman's body. It's very clear there's a distinction. So it's not like I am a man. You will think of me as 100% man, just like you would a
Yeah.
biological person. Like, he acknowledges that he was actually born with a woman's body and
Yep.
has made the transition at least most of the way.
Yeah. So, because we all kind of go with this, the same narrative. Me and Buck have actually talked about this too, and it's okay. So even like when Matt Walsh's "What Is a Woman" came out, I watched it and I gave my own definition because I have my own definition. So a woman is an adult human female,
Mhm.
but me, Buck, and all of us, and a lot of us that are more fighting this, we're like, no, are trans women are trans women, and he's like, and he'll say trans men are trans men. Um, which to me, a trans woman is a male who has gender dysphoria and has taken steps to live and be perceived by society as a woman, but it doesn't make
Right.
us the same.
Right.
And I've always talked about that distinction is important because if you want to talk about erasure of women, which is very valid and it's a good way to talk about it, we can also talk about the erasure of trans people.
Mhm.
I don't know what it's like to grow up as a female and go through the issues that females go through. I'll never have a period. I'll never, have all these other things biologically that happen to females.
Mhm.
But females and most other people don't know what it's like to have gender dysphoria, not feel comfortable in their own bodies for most of their lives, and then the pain and steps it takes to actually transition. And so that's where
Right.
we all kind of get into that same mode is, yeah, I am absolutely a male. I have no issue saying I'm a male. But
Right.
the issue actually comes when, like you said, it comes to saying, no, I am female, which again goes into queer theory because it's based on postmodernism, which don't believe that there's any such thing as absolute truths. And so it's just false. Biology is real. I will never be a female. And there's, I mean, I've lived my own lives, and it almost takes away from what I've gone through in my life as well, just as much as it takes away from what females go through as well. And,
Right.
and I think it's a great distinction to make. And it's funny because I get called self-hating all the time. Me and Buck get called self-hating all the time. And I'm like, I don't hate myself. I'm very honest with who I am. You're the ones
Mhm.
that are trying to pretend.
Right. No, you know, is it kind of similar to my perception is that many gay men uh, have a different experience, a uniquely different experience than many straight men, right? Because maybe they had different interests, and because of those interests, coincided with their sexuality, their orientation, um, and so it seems to me that we've kind of gotten past that now, and we accept this notion that, like, a lot of gay men are really good at, very stylish. They're awesome at the gym, whatever, these kind of stereotypes, right? That we have. And then, we have other stereotypes that, like, oh, if you're a man, you should be able to work on a car and, catch a fish and, cook it and all this other stuff, whatever. So we have these, like, kind of like stereotypes. And
Yeah.
is 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 that something that we should kind of strive for as a society, to say, like, look, there'll be trans women and trans men, and they will have their own stereotype of who they are based on their personal experience, but the collective, and I know libertarians hate saying that word,
Yeah.
but the collective nature of their experiences, which happen to be similar, right? In the same way that once upon a time, gay men had a certain set of experiences that were similar, but not always guaranteed.
Yeah.
There's always, there's always outliers and all that stuff. Is that something maybe we should kind of aim for as a society instead? And just say, like, look, there's trans women, there's trans men, there's women, and it is all good, and they're all going to be different, and there'll be some overlap, and sometimes they'll almost be the same.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, I think it's interesting because, it used to be progressives and liberals who would talk about stereotypes and getting rid of stereotypes. Like,
Right.
stereotypes aren't, like, we really shouldn't stereotype people into other things. Yes, there are going to be certain things that certain communities go through. Like, that's why we have different communities.
Hmm.
That's why we're even having the internal struggle in the trans community in and of itself, because you have, it's always been transsexuals, people who actually transition, and now it's become this umbrella term, and then
Hmm.
they actually are almost kicking out the transsexuals, and that's, I mean, so yeah, there's going to be these communities that we've kind of fallen, but almost most of the trans people that I know, like, we don't really have a ton of trans friends that we hang out with on a daily basis, but that's okay because we don't really fit into our community
Hmm.
anymore. But there are going to be, just like you said, like with gay people, with everything else, we have communities that we kind of understand each other's struggles, so we kind of come together on things.
Hmm.
But I don't think you can. I think we need to get rid of the stereotypes, and it seems like now, again, they're telling people that they're trans simply based on stereotypes. Like,
Right.
the woke, like, leftist movement is very regressive in a lot of issues. They're the ones pushing for segregation. They're the ones pushing for, using stereotypes on trans people. They're the ones that are pushing for all this other stuff. So I think it like, going back to that is not necessarily a good thing either. Like, we shouldn't
Right.
be looking at, women can work on cars and like football, and that doesn't,
Right.
and the left telling them that makes them trans, and it does,
Right.
So I think you're right, though. I think that we can look at it and say that there are certain sets of things that that different communities have in common.
Right.
Um,
And we
but
shouldn't bind people to them.
yeah, exactly. We're not a monolith. Like, we're
Right.
everybody that's like this is like nobody. We don't live in a monolith society, anyways. Like, we are all individuals, and that's
Right.
how I think we look at how people are and how they act and what they do, and that's why even me, as a libertarian in this sense too, is like, and fighting against the stereotypes and the perceptions that are being created about my community, being
Hmm.
created about me, because in general society, we do know that it's the statistics generally, the perceptions are created by about 8% of the population, um,
Right.
and usually the most radical 8% of the population. So, um, but that's why we need more people like me and Blair and Buck and a bunch of other trans people, showing that we're not this
Hmm.
monolith and we don't agree with, transitioning children and stuff like that.
Right. Okay, so I know we're a little bit over time. I try to keep my shows
You're
to an
good.
hour. Are you good to go? Okay, because I got a couple more things that I wanted to get to. This one, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can. Um,
Okay.
so growing up, so I'm short. I'm 5'3", and I weigh all like I would be considered heavy compared to me, weighing in at a whopping 126 pounds right now. Okay. Like, that's how much I weigh. For the longest time, I bounced between 116, 118 for the longest time. And then all of a sudden, I just like blew up. Like, now I'm basically a fat ass now compared to me, of course. Okay. And but so I was a scrawny guy growing up. Like, I joke with people, I tell them, like, I stopped growing in 5th grade, whatever. Um, Initially when I was growing up, it was really my issue that really got me was being short and not being part of the cool kids, right? And that played a role. They all kind of overlapped a little bit. And I remember that kids would make fun of me around 6th grade tremendously. They were just brutal, right? And like, I went to a Catholic school, and they came up to me one time, like, it was like the day before Halloween, and they're looking me up and down. They're like, check me out. I'm like, what are you doing? And these were not friends, okay? By the way, just classroom peers. And they were like, well, we want to know, we're going to dress up tomorrow as nerds or losers or something like that, some derogatory term along that line, and we want to make sure we get it right very hurtful. Like, they just went out of their way just to be jerks to me, right? Like, this is not cool.
Mhm.
And so it bothered me being short for the longest time. And then one day, we called it, for all you young folk out there, we called it cracking on each other. Okay, that's what we call it. I don't know what they call it these days. I'm too old to know. But
I don't know either.
so one day they're all making fun of me.
Offending. They're offending each other.
Right. They're all offending me with their very vicious, violent words. That's an inside joke for people. Words are not violence, just for the record. A threat can be taken seriously, but words are generally not violence. But anyway, so they're offending me with their mean words. And out of nowhere, I beat Eminem to the punch, where he in 8 Mile decided to, at the very end, rap about himself and all the things that were bad about him. I basically did the same thing, not in rap format, because I got no connection to music like that. And so I started making jokes about myself, and they were like stunned. They were like, "What? He's cracking on himself. What do we do?" Right? And that was a turning point for me. And I think that's when I started becoming more comfortable with me and my skin, my body, what I have, what I got,
Mhm.
the cards that were dealt to me. And so then I just started. After that point, you could make a short joke, and I was like, yeah, I haven't heard that one before. Yeah, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
So, does humor play a role in
Oh, yes.
normalizing, like, say, the trans community or any marginalized community? Because here's the funny thing: if you don't know me, I mean, we've met, but you don't know me.
Yeah.
More than likely, you would probably feel comfortable making a joke about my height, right? More than likely, because it's generally considered acceptable,
Eh,
right?
but I'm only 5'4", so
Okay, well, maybe you wouldn't. Okay, but people would probably be more likely to make a joke about my height, right? And
Mhm.
I wouldn't care. I'd be like, okay. And for me, that kind of signals that that I don't have that barrier between us, right? Because I'm
Mhm.
really the one that controls it, right? But here's the thing: even if we well, I guess if we knew each other, I would be able to do it. But I wouldn't know in general what jokes, if any, I could make about the trans community. And I mean in good fun. I don't mean
Yeah.
at somebody's expense to hurt their feelings. I mean, in the same way you might rib your friend, make a joke about their height, or about how his wife tells him what to do, or whatever. I wouldn't know any jokes that I could make about the trans. It's not that I want to make fun of the trans community. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like, I don't know what jokes might be acceptable. So I feel like there's this imposed barrier. Am I crazy thinking this way?
Well, that's the way that they would make you perceive things. I can see that would be a perception that a lot of people have, especially if they're very, again, self-aware like you are. You understand how jokes can feel and stuff like that.
Mhm.
The way that they treated Dave Chappelle, though,
Right.
and Ricky Gervais, I love both their specials, and I've said for a long time that if if you can't laugh at yourself, then you have no business laughing at somebody else. And humor does play a huge part in this.
Mhm.
In fact, when I was coming out and kind of be around my family more and stuff, because my family lives up in Michigan, so they don't live near me. But as I was coming out and stuff like that, I love making jokes about
Mhm.
myself. I make jokes about myself all the time. In fact, I've been talking about for a since for a couple weeks, maybe a couple months now, that I'm probably gonna do some stand up, because I
Oh,
have
nice.
so many jokes that I can tell, and it's so fun because I always crack jokes. Like, it was kind of funny. Like, me and my brother and my sister were sitting at a bar one time, and my brother's now wife was sitting on the other end, and my dad was sitting on the side, and so my sister's younger and my brother's older, and the bartender was just like, it looks like it's like a transition between the three of you,
Mhm.
because we all so my brother looks just like my dad, my sister looks just like my mom, and I do look like the middle child, and I am the
Mhm.
middle child,
Okay.
and so when she said that, I just kind of made the offhand joke like, well, in more ways than one, because I was transitioning at the time too. So it was a transition between me and my brother, and my sister.
Right.
I'm like in the middle.
Right.
It was perfect, and it was also told to me at the same time. Even people just getting used to who I am, it makes it so that they don't feel like they have to walk around on eggshells
Right.
around me. Um, because I don't want anybody to feel like they have to walk around eggshells on me. I am, and that's what I told you before we started the show. I am one of the most open people in the world. Like,
Mhm.
honestly, since I came out, I have zero secrets in my life, and there's almost no question that you can ask me, period, that I won't answer.
Right.
And I think that's part of it too, is just being open and self-aware and self-confident in who I am. But yeah, I love humor, and jokes don't tend to offend me, and there are some jokes that I've seen that they're a little off color and I don't care for, but
Right.
at the end of the day, I'm not gonna go sulk about them usually. It's
Right.
like, and it also depends on, like you said, the intent behind it.
Right.
Is the intent to try to hurt somebody, or is it try to get a laugh?
Right.
I think they're two very different things. And to get the laugh, not at somebody's expense, but the whole thing of laughing at somebody versus laughing with somebody.
Right.
I think that plays a huge role. But I love to joke, and I love to joke about myself. I love to joke about this, as Dave Chappelle said, this kind of hilarious situation that I'm in.
Right. Well, it's, to me, I kind of use humor as a measure, and maybe that's because
Yeah,
that's how I dealt with it. I don't know why I use it, but I feel like that is the ultimate gauge of where an individual is in relation to others. Like, you can make short jokes at me all day long. I
yeah.
cannot remember the last time that I got bothered by somebody making a short joke, other than maybe just like, dude, seriously, like, that was so lame. Like, outside of that, I
Mhm.
don't really get bothered. And if it's funny, I'll
At
laugh.
least
I'm
make
like,
it
wow, that's
good.
pretty good. Right?
Yeah,
Like, wow,
if
that's
if
pretty
it's
good.
funny, at least
Yeah.
make the joke funny. If it's not funny, then it's gonna be like annoying, right?
Well, yeah.
So
And but the interesting part of that was I had to get there.
yep.
And I feel like what's going on right now, what we're seeing is there's this shaping of society to specifically one of the reasons is like companies will say, hey, we want you to start introducing your pronouns so that other people will feel comfortable using their pronouns.
It's
and
it's worrying about other people's comfort
and
is
I don't feel like it's going to work. I feel like it's
no.
going to backfire, like that's, or it's going to delay it much longer than it should.
I agree.
Because if we said, look, you are responsible for how you feel. Now, other people, they ought not intentionally make fun of you to hurt your feelings. Like, that's not appropriate. They should not lay a finger on you, not even a single finger, or period. No threats. So these are clearly off limits. But if somebody makes a joke, maybe start with saying, okay, was there were you trying to just express with me what you think is a relationship you have similar to what you have with one of your friends? My friends could come over and I could make all kind of jokes about them because we're
Yeah,
friends. We have that, right? And to me, that's the gauge. That's, to me, that's the best gauge. Because if I can make fun of your idiosyncrasies, whatever they are, then that means you're confident, and we are in close enough, to be able to do that with each other. So
yeah.
that's kind of where I am with this. I'm just like, and not all jokes are funny, and some of them are mean spirited and all that. But usually, I just roll my eyes if it's at me. I'm like, okay, whatever, that's dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, typically it's just like, okay, I won't laugh. I just walk away. And it is kind of funny because, we talked about pronouns and all this other stuff, and misgendering. And I'm like, I've misgendered myself before on accident
Sure.
and just had to laugh about it. Like, I was watching TV one time, and I was talking about women because I'm bisexual, and I was like, I've always been more of a legs and ass man. And then I stopped and was like, I turned to my friend and I was like, I just misgendered myself. And she was
Right.
like, I heard that. I wasn't going to say anything. I'm like, I just go, oh, I guess I'm canceled.
That's funny. All right. So we've talked about being both libertarians, and for anybody that's watching, Sarah and I met at the Georgia convention last year.
Yeah.
First time we've ever met. I think we maybe crossed paths a few times on the internet,
Yeah.
but that's not real until you make it real in real life. So we've actually met in real life. So we're like pals now, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
close
We're
enough.
friends now. Yeah.
Right. So, but because we're both libertarians, what I want to, because this is a big debate in the libertarian community. So, how should libertarians treat the issue of the trans community in relationship to, and it's a big question, so maybe we can just narrow it down. But like, what's our approach to the trans community, or what should it be in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think it's like my approach. I think, well, it's just like any other community, right? We respect people for being who they are, especially, I mean, we allow full, bodily autonomy for adults. We
Mhm,
put the onus and make sure that, we're protecting children. Um, and those are the things we really need to worry about. I mean, we can have our differences, but as long as you're not trying to get government to, take away my bodily autonomy, I
mhm,
don't really care what you think or anything like that. I think that's the key is just again keeping government out of it and making sure that like we all know like where the lines are.
mhm,
It's inappropriate for children. What's inappropriate for children compared to what's appropriate and when adults have bodily autonomy. I mean, understand too that there's probably a lot of trans people who are looking at getting out of the left. And if we're looking to pull people into a community that's not a social conservative community, then we should be open to accepting people for who they are. And,
mhm,
and, and, and I think that goes entails, and it should be, we should give people respect. But again, respect is earned, or respect is given where respect is gotten, type
mhm,
thing. I don't like the respect is earned because I think you start with respect and you can lose it, but you
mhm.
don't need to earn it per se.
Gotcha.
And I think that's where we kind of just go, just basic common decency towards each other as people. And as long as government's not involved, it's no big deal. Like I talked about earlier with associations, I love free speech because we can associate where we can choose to associate with each other. And when we're talking, I actually wrote an op-ed last year for the Libertarian Republic that's talked about even like the bathroom issues. I
Mhm,
think one thing that we're missing a lot in like the issues with bathrooms and locker rooms is this notion that business owners should be the ones to make the determination of what happens within their businesses. When we're talking about like the Title IX issues and stuff like that, that's a different story. But you know, the free market can decide a lot of the other stuff,
mhm.
like bathroom issues and stuff like that. Like if a business wants me to go into the women's room and you don't like that, don't go there. Just
Do
like
we
if a business wants to keep me out of the women's room, or if a business doesn't want to hire me because I'm trans, I don't want to work there,
Right,
and I won't go spend my money there. I
right.
really, it's no skin off my back for the most part.
Do we put a lot of effort into our associations? Because I feel like right now there are there's a certain segment of the libertarian community who will, if you say, hey, there are males and females, that's it. There's two genders. Like if you say something like that, they'll practically say, you know what, you don't belong. You're done. The association should be cut off for you. And I'm like, I don't know if it should be that. That seems drastic to me.
Well, associations per se,
I mean,
it
you can
really
do it. Don't
depends.
get me wrong. I just think it's a drastic move.
I agree. I'm with you. I think that see that's an issue that we have kind of as liberty. It's okay, it's the difference between the liberty movement and the libertarian party, I think, as well, is because the liberty movement, again, it's all about associations. If I'm in the liberty
Mhm.
movement and you don't really like me, there's other people in the movement that do, and I can
Right.
do my thing. The liberty as a party, it's a lot different because you have a platform that you're trying to coincide in order to get people elected. And so sometimes it may not pull people over when you're just outright, mean to people.
Right.
Or you are cutting out certain segments of society, which is one of the reasons why I actually don't I'm not really involved much with the Libertarian Party anymore because I work on single issue advocacy,
Mhm.
and working on getting things done, and working with whoever I can work with in order to get those things done. You know, kind of taking a
Right.
page out of Spike's playbook and being like, you know, when he worked with Black Lives Matters, to be like, okay, we're going to get criminal justice reform done, but that's the only thing we can work on because we don't agree on anything else. I
Right.
think that's where we get to, and that's where I've
Right.
been focusing my attention on, and kind of more away from the party drama and stuff like that, because that's drama that I don't need.
Yeah, it's a time suck, but well, one of the things that I've always I look at it and I say, if we're a political party that's out there, we're telling people like you should join the Libertarian Party, you should vote, you should put us in office, yada yada yada, all that stuff. I'm like, well, that kind of in itself means it kind of requires us to have a certain level of numbers, a certain level of support, and the reality is there's just not simply enough, in my opinion, out there to say we can make all these great changes in society through our legislative and political efforts by narrowing on our associations. So even though you have the
Yeah,
freedom to do it, and I don't disagree, like people, I've had people say this more than one time. They're like, "You just don't understand freedom of association." I understand it. I'm criticizing you for using it left and right. Like you don't understand my criticism, apparently. So
yeah,
clearly, I need to communicate this better. But it is not that I don't understand it. I'm criticizing for your excessive use of it, and
yeah,
you're just cutting everybody out. Because I'm like, who are you going to have left? And then what are you going to do in society with your tiny little group of people that thinks just like you, right? You're going to
yeah,
have to start working with people and broaden it and say, well, I maybe I don't like this person who refuses to use pronouns, but they're otherwise a fairly nice person. And they're not, they're not a jerk. There's just that one particular issue where we are, kind of verbally sparring or whatever. And so I just feel like what you said, and then combine that with be more flexible with people,
yeah.
because we're a political party. Like we don't have, and we're a third political party, so we're like small.
Yeah,
Like
you
we don't.
have to worry about pulling people in. You have to be welcoming as a bigger
Yeah,
tent movement, I think.
yeah. I think it's just like it's either that or stay an ineffective third party. Those are your
Yeah.
options.
And
Narrow
like
your
I said,
circle.
and like what I said is I've almost moved away from it because I don't
Mhm.
I see a lot of that ineffectiveness, and I can be effective elsewhere. Still
Right,
vote still vote libertarian, and I still associate with libertarians, but
right,
I just try to stay out of the day to day and
right.
stay out of that drama for so much because of
Well, I
that
think
reason though.
yeah, and I think you do it a little differently as far as I've seen. You don't get on Facebook or Twitter, or I see you on Twitter, not Facebook, but you don't get on Twitter and you're not like, all right, the Libertarian Party's terrible. It's gone out the window. There's nothing we could do about it.
No.
Total white supremacist bigots. All's lost.
Well, it's
You
interesting
know.
because I came from the right. That's what people don't understand about me is I came from I was a Tea Party conservative before I moved
Mhm.
over to the libertarian movement. But I also, even when it comes to some of that drama, I do take each individual issue on its face. Like even each individual, um, even if it's somebody that I don't like in the movement,
Mhm.
I don't put that bias on a statement that they make. Like there's a lot of people that will put a bias on, say they don't like this person for whatever reason, but what they do is not necessarily against what they, is not really against their ideals. They
Mhm.
will still put that bias on them and still not like what they said just because they have this full bias against that person. And I
Right.
try to take it on an individual case basis. If I don't
Right.
like a person, I can still see when they do good. I mean,
Right.
I give AOC credit a lot. When she's right, she's right.
Right.
Um, I can give anybody credit where it's due. I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of people that have issues doing that on both sides of the issues in the libertarian party right now.
Right. No, I totally agree. I found out the very so it's funny when I first got onto the scene. I was very critical of leadership in general, and
Hmm.
it was the old regime, if you will. Um, and I would criticize them, and I would sometimes criticize their opponents. And uh, but a lot of times I criticize the opponents, just because they were the ones kind of more speaking out. The regime, if you will, is they were kind of just busy doing their work for the most part, right?
Hmm.
And I noticed that in my opinion, my experience specifically, when I would criticize, like, say, the more right leaning libertarians, they would disagree, sometimes get a little huffy with me, but otherwise be like, whatever. And they would just, like, hey, you'll learn. And then when I would criticize their opponents, the more left leaning or woke, if you will, they would a lot of times call me names.
Mhm.
Like that was the beginning where, and it was really because a lot of people, they're like, well, you side with like the Mises Caucus. And just for the record, Mises Caucus, for anybody that's watching that doesn't know the Libertarian Party, just a caucus that is in the Libertarian Party that did grow to a substantial size and was able to acquire the entirety of the leadership at the national level and many leadership many leadership positions, almost in full or in full at state level. So, um, but they would just be like, "Oh, you're just siding with the Mises Caucus." I'm like, well, part of it is how they treated me. Like I was willing to come to the table and treat you, case by case basis. Like, okay, we disagree here, but we agree on this other thing, so that's cool. But you've otherwise treated me pretty well. But a lot of people, uh, they were fine and they were happy to have me criticize the other team. But man, when it came back to them, when it was their turn, they got vicious.
Mhm.
And it was very distinct. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm siding with the people who weren't jerks to me. I don't know what to tell
Yeah.
you. So,
Yeah.
and I was critical. And it's funny because people don't realize I was actually critical of the Mises Caucus first when I started looking at national level, and I criticized them pretty heavily, and they
Mhm.
actually took it like a champ. They didn't always agree with me, and sometimes sometimes they got a little snarky. It was nothing too serious. But then when the shoe got put on somebody else's foot, oh boy, they didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it is interesting because we all have our experiences and stuff in there,
mhm.
and I try to I don't know. I have friends on all sides of the issue, so it's kind of one of those things. It's like I've seen it go both ways. I see how both sides have started to treat each other very similarly.
Mhm.
And if
They do.
you're kind of on the outside, if you disagree with either side, then sometimes they both treat you the same,
Right. And that's not to
with the same
discount people that had
viciousness.
the opposite experience. I do believe that
Yeah,
other people, like some people have said, like, "Hey, DL, I had the exact opposite experience. The Mises people were very terrible to me, whereas the woke
yeah,
people, I hate using these terms, but whatever. The woke
yeah,
people were, they brought me in and they were there for me and all that. So I get that. I understand that happened, but I think they need to realize that other people had the exact opposite experience,
yeah,
and however they felt, I felt just with different set of people.
yep, yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. And again, it goes back to somehow we got to learn to work together
We do.
on things. And I think the whole Mises takeover was a good. It's showing a lot of
Mhm.
the issues we've had for a long time, and it's going to, in the end, I think it will start to work itself out because we, at some point, you have to learn to live with each other if we're gonna actually make things
We do.
happen and actually win races. You have to learn to live with each other and not say, well, this is our show now and get out, or try
Right.
to or just leave because you disagree with
Mhm.
something that's going on too. I think there's some of that going on. It's kind of
Mhm.
both sides of the issue, and I think so at some point we'll figure it out.
No, I agree, and I think the issues effectively, I don't want to trail us off into a long conversation about, like, internal workings of the party, but I think those are
Mhm,
very similar to the issues that we've been talking about tonight, where when you are comfortable with you first need to be comfortable with who you are. Like, you're really not going to change the world, not in a good way. Or if you do, it's going to be a bloody fight to get there. But so if you want to change the world in a better way, I think you need to start with yourself, and you need to be comfortable with who you are. Because how
mhm,
could you be, if you're not comfortable with who you are, how are you going to be comfortable when somebody has an honest misconception? Because you're going to probably perceive it, like I did once, as a very intentional thing. Like, oh, you just said that because I'm a short guy and
mhm,
you don't like short people, or whatever the case may be. And so I think it just kind of puts you on the defense constantly. And when you're on the defense, at least socially speaking, um, it's harder to change minds. It's harder to
Yeah.
for people to see you for who you really are inside, not the person that's fighting to be who you want to be.
Yeah, I think you said it best actually in your opening monologue. How do we sit down? How do we sit down and have these types of conversations with people we disagree with, or even that
Mhm,
we do or that we agree with, or we have preconceived notions about each other if we
mhm.
are coming in with biases that we
Right,
can't, that we're going to place those biases. Like you literally have to come into these conversations and have and put your biases to the side and
right.
actually listen to people
Mhm,
and talking about but it goes back to, and it also kind of reminds you of how do you say that saying that you made a mistake in this culture is one of the most difficult things to do. So
mhm.
how do you come into something with a clear open mind, and bias free, and when you're having these conversations,
Right.
and I think there's a few of us that can span the you know the communication gap. I think
Mhm.
you're one of those people that could span the communication gap. I think Spike's a great person that could span the
He's great. He's definitely
communication
great.
gap, and a few other people. And I think that that's what's going to bring together more of the fracture party, but not coming at each other with the biases that we have,
Right,
and having more conversations with people that we don't necessarily agree
right.
with, and honestly getting it off Twitter. I
Yeah.
think getting it off social media, and even if it's a Zoom call like this,
Mhm.
or it's any other, like, get face to face and talk to people. Like,
Yes,
ask somebody that you
yes.
disagree with. If you're having to disagree with somebody on Twitter, just ask them to a Zoom call, and
Yeah.
just have a conversation. It doesn't have to be, streamed online, but just have a conversation with them, because what that does is that breaks down the communication issues that,
Mhm,
typing and texting and stuff like that, and the perceptions that because
mhm.
you're reading your bias into those words, and
Right.
this, it also humanizes the person that you're sitting across
Mhm.
from. It makes you realize that they're just not words on a screen. There is an actual person with real
Right,
emotions, with real thoughts, and that you guys can actually come together on a lot of these issues.
right.
I've done streams on socialist people that are about communist channel. I've been on their channels, trans people that we vehemently disagree on stuff, but it was a good conversation because we were both able to humanize the other person and
Right,
realize that, we're just trying to come together and actually have meaningful conversations, not just trying to prove each other wrong.
right. No, absolutely. Totally agree. I think my rule of thumb is I try not to say anything on Twitter that I wouldn't say to your face or social media in general. And then if I've been beefing with you, I usually try to, especially if I've never met you, I usually try the first time I get an opportunity to come up and stick my hand out and say, "Hey, I'm DL." Just because
Yeah,
I feel like, because I could have a disagreement with somebody. Um, and maybe I misunderstood the situation. Maybe I misread it, right? And I got mad
yeah,
at them when maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe there would
yep,
have been a little bit more grace to be given had I understood something that I didn't realize, because of that communication gap. So,
absolutely.
but I don't want to keep you
I
any
think you're
longer.
one of the greats. Yeah, I think you're one of the greats at that too. From what
I
I've seen, just from the
I
outside
try.
looking in, I think you
I
do a
have
good
my
job
moments.
of uh of kind of, like I said, spanning that communication gap with people.
I try
Um,
and appreciate it. I do have my moments, and I need my friends to check me every now and then, be like, DL, you need to knock it off. You're losing it
oh,
here,
I get it.
buddy. You're out of line.
I get. I
So
get. I mean, every once in a while, that former intense military person comes out, but
right,
it doesn't come out often
right.
because I can get
So
intense and I can shoot back.
yeah. So well, I appreciate you being on. Any
Thanks for
final
having me.
words for me that I need to consider, that maybe something I didn't think about, that I should just walk away and just think about?
I don't think so. I think we're good. Um, you know, for everybody else, I mean, for everybody, kind of, I guess, just remember again, yeah, there's a person sitting across that screen when you're on social media, and take things at face value. Remember to not put judgment on, um, a whole community based on what you're perceiving as actions by a small portion of that community, because
Mhm.
remember, what we see on social media is a very small percentage of the people that are
Right.
actually out there going through it. Like I said, it's
Right.
usually about 8% that gets the attention.
Yep. So, all right. Well, I think I'm going to close up here real quick,
Okay.
and then we'll be done. So, everybody, that's all for this week. You can find other episodes at libertydad.com. Those are going to be all my episodes that are in audio format, and that'll have all the links to all the different, drawing a blank here on. It's been a long night, but like Apple, iTunes and Spotify and whatnot. You can also find archived video episodes at youtube.libertydad.com, and you can also connect with me at Liberty Dad, all one word, on Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter. Promise you I'll try to be nice. I usually am. And then you can also email me to libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you, although email is the worst form to try to get a hold of me. Remember, though, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. So I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time, and I'm out.